Oh dear, gravity can be a nuisance at times. I expect we've all seen its effects at school and at home, and usually with messy consequences. For centuries in athletics, competition has involved a trial as much against gravity as other competitors. In the high jump, in pole vaulting, and in the throwing events such as the shot, athletes have competed against the effects of gravity. Gravity isn't just peculiar to the Earth. It's a force which exists between any pair of masses, whether we're considering two snooker balls, two buses, or two planets. The bigger the masses, and the closer they are together, the greater the force of attraction due to gravity. The force between a 1 kilogram mass and the Earth is about 10 newtons, whereas that between a 100 kilogram pole vaulter and the Earth is almost 1,000 newtons. To leave the surface of the planet, we must overcome this force. Unaided, we're unable to do this for more than a few seconds. The gravity on the Moon is only about 1/6 that on Earth. This is because the Moon has a much lower mass than the Earth. If we ever have athletics competitions on the Moon, we'll need a whole new set of records. You can see how easy it is for a heavy-suited astronaut to jump on the Moon. Birds are much more successful than us at competing against gravity. They're able to fly or glide for quite long periods. How successful they are depends on the size of their bodies and their wings. Small birds, like this hummingbird, filmed in slow motion, can fly for several minutes, but have small bodies and wings and can't keep it up for long. Larger bodies and wings mean that some birds can hover very successfully, enabling them to search for prey. Buzzards and eagles can stay aloft for long periods, using the air currents with their large wings. Albatrosses are masters of the skies and might not touch the ground for weeks. Even heavy birds, like these swans, fly very well, although they may take some time to get airborne. For centuries, humans have tried to match the skills of birds and fly. In the Middle Ages, tower jumpers trusted homemade wings in an attempt to flap their way into the skies, often with fatal consequences. The acceleration due to gravity can be quite dramatic, as illustrated by modern bungee jumpers. The first successful flight was made by the Montgolfier brothers in Paris in 1783. They used hot air, produced by burning straw in a stove, to lift a balloon. It stayed airborne for 25 minutes and travelled 5 miles. Of course, there were some risks attached to taking the fire with you to lift the balloon. But the same technique is popular as a sport today. But modern hot air balloons using gas burners can stay aloft for much longer and travel much greater distances. In 1987, Richard Branson and Per Lindstrand crossed the Atlantic in an elaborate form of hot air balloon at speeds of up to 210 kilometers per hour. Hot air balloons make use of the fact that the heated air inside the balloon is less dense than the surrounding cooler air, and it gets forced upwards like a cork in water. The same principle plays a part in cloud formation. Another gas which is even less dense than heated air is hydrogen. Only 10 days after the flight of the Montgolfier balloon, another Frenchman flew in a balloon filled with hydrogen. Hydrogen balloons became very successful, and by the 1930s were carrying passengers across the Atlantic. The most famous of these airships was the Hindenburg. It was launched in Germany in 1936 and was designed to be the ultimate in luxury. It had double cabins for 72 passengers, hot and cold water, a dining room and lounge complete with grand piano. It made over 60 flights with more than 30 transatlantic crossings. Unfortunately, on the 6th of May 1937, as the Hindenburg came into moor in New York, it burst into flames. It demonstrated in the worst possible way the danger of using flammable hydrogen gas, as 35 people died in the fire. There's a safer gas, helium, that doesn't ignite with oxygen, and small modern airships have flown successfully using this gas. But it's unlikely we'll ever see passengers crossing the Atlantic in airships again. Besides hot air and hydrogen balloons, the other form of unmechanized flight developed in the 19th century was the glider. The early experiments were carried out in England by Sir George Cayley. Some years ago, Anglia Television helped to build a replica of one of his designs. Pulled along by a car, it managed to rise in the air more or less under control, but the landings were bumpy. This form of flight is popular today, with modern gliders looking remarkably similar in design to the albatross. It's a skillful pastime to fly a glider on the currents of air in the skies. But it isn't powered flight, and powered flight was the natural aim of the early experimenters. Cayley thought about using a steam engine. But the first approach to powered flight was to use the power of the human body to flap the wings or turn the propellers. But the construction materials available were too heavy and too flimsy at the same time to make it possible to achieve controlled flight in this way. The development of very light but very strong materials did eventually make human-powered flight just about possible in the late 1970s. The Gossamer Condor became the first aircraft to fly by human muscle power alone in 1977 at a maximum height of 3 meters. And in 1979, the Gossamer Albatross, with a 30-meter wingspan, became the first human-powered aircraft to fly across the English Channel. It's a great achievement to have flown the 35 kilometers across the Channel, in effect by biking your way into the air. But it's hardly a practical way of establishing powered and controlled flight. The first sustained engine-powered flight was undoubtedly that of Orville and Wilbur Wright in the USA in 1903. The Wright brothers stand out amongst the pioneers of flight because they worked in a methodical and scientific way rather than using trial and error. The success of this approach can be demonstrated by the propeller they developed. It was a marvel of efficiency, converting 66% of the engine's output into thrust. Even modern propellers can only achieve 85% efficiency. The Wright brothers applied themselves to the study of the problems of flight by devising strategies, testing their ideas, recording the results, and modifying their understanding in the light of these results. Once the problem of achieving powered flight had been solved, there were rapid developments in aircraft design. The capabilities of aircraft improved dramatically. Flying was a sport and an adventure that drew crowds. But with the start of World War I, this new form of transport was seen as a weapon of war. As a result, large sums were made available for the development of such aircraft as the Sopwith Camel and the Fokker DR-1. Bigger planes with more engines were developed as bombers. And war, for soldiers and for civilians, would never be the same again. After the war, larger aircraft were developed with greater range, speed and altitude. Alcock and Brown made the first non-stop transatlantic flight. Cargo and passenger flights became more common. The age of the airlines had begun. In 1927, the American Charles Lindbergh made the first solo non-stop flight across the Atlantic. Lindbergh's flight pointed the way to the regular crossings of the Atlantic that we take for granted today, and the acceleration of world communications. Staying in the air for hours on end and crossing vast tracts of the Earth's surface are important steps on the way to leaving the planet completely. Between 1920 and 1940, two other important developments took place in different areas related to flight. The first of these was the production of an aircraft powered by a jet engine. This technology provided greater power, enabling aircraft to fly further and faster. At the end of the Second World War, jet aircraft were set to become important weapons of war, and the military developments led on to the construction of civil airliners powered by jet engines. The Concorde, flying faster than the speed of sound, is the furthest development of this trend to date. The second development was in the field of rocketry. Rockets were not new.
Right, girls, let's get out of the way.
Indeed, the Chinese had used gunpowder and rockets to propel spears. And we all know rockets for entertainment purposes. The new rockets used liquid fuels, and this increased both the range and the load the rockets could carry. Groups working in the United States, the Soviet Union and Germany were all involved in developing liquid-fueled rockets. As with aircraft, the start of World War II provided a reason for rockets to be developed further as weapons of destruction. In Germany, the very successful V-2 rocket was produced. Over 2,000 of these rockets were launched at Britain and Belgium. After the war, research in rockets continued in both the United States and the Soviet Union, where these pictures are from. The work concentrated on increasing their power and range. This led on the 4th of October 1957 to the successful launch of Sputnik by the Soviet Union. This was the first man-made satellite and consisted of an aluminium sphere weighing 84 kilograms. It carried instruments to gather data about the upper atmosphere. The space age had begun. Progress was rapid, with improved rocket design allowing larger payloads. On the 12th of April 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth. His flight lasted 108 minutes and reached a height of over 300 kilometers. Less than a month later, the first American manned spaceflight took place.
3, 2, 1, 0. All right, liftoff and the clock has started. Yes, sir, reading you loud and clear. This is Freedom.
Progress again was rapid, with longer and longer flights, and rockets capable of carrying more than one passenger. For the Soviet Union, The aim was to develop the technology to use Earth-orbiting satellites and space stations. The Russians have been able to keep their cosmonauts in space for very long periods, conducting scientific experiments and providing medical data about the prospects for long-term space exploration. The Americans set themselves a target of putting a man on the moon by 1970. President Kennedy set out their aims in 1961.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
In the 35 years since the launch of Sputnik, we've come to regard satellites as common objects and to take for granted the new technologies they've provided. Yet our lives would be very different without the facilities they make possible. Amongst other things, satellites have enabled us to watch live television coverage of important events around the world. They provide communications links and relay weather information and data about the Earth and the universe. Some of them move over the surface of the Earth as they orbit. Others are in geostationary orbits, always over the same spot. It's the geostationary satellites that can relay signals directly down to dishes on Earth to provide the reliable telecommunications network that we depend on today. They are the ones that beam television programs around the world, whether it's between nations and broadcasting companies or directly into our homes. The world would be a very different place without satellites. Putting satellites into orbit is an extremely costly business, particularly using rockets which can only be launched once. In America in the 1970s, the Space Transportation System project began to look at more effective ways of launching satellites using space vehicles that could be brought back to Earth and used again. Trials were made with prototypes launched from aircraft to prove that they could glide back to Earth. The result of all this work was the Space Shuttle. This vehicle has the capability of carrying a payload of over 30 tons and a crew of up to 7. The craft can be landed on a runway and reused a large number of times. Its engines only help to take it into space. It lands like a glider.
Nose is coming down, 2 feet, 1 foot, down.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start.
The propulsion for launching the shuttle consists of 3 main engines powered by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen fed from a large external tank. In addition, 2 detachable solid fuel booster rockets are used to provide the power necessary for liftoff. These are used up and jettisoned after the first 2 minutes of flight. The shuttle technology has proved generally successful, barring one bad accident, with almost 40 shuttle flights using 4 different craft. The way has been opened up for leaving the planet altogether.